Hi, I'm just here doing the check over on your Yamaha Viking 700. So I'm just going to go through the issues that I found with it from the service list. And what I'll do is I'll put together an estimate for you and see how much it's going to cost for you to do repairs. It does need a fair amount of work, mostly related to brakes. Quite a bit more than just brake pads, unfortunately. And I'm just going to go through with you on why that is. So we'll start there. So let me flip my page over so I have a list here. So just to get the little stuff out of the way, tie rod ends, both sides have excess play in them. They need to be replaced, so that's the left side and the right side. So we can replace those now. And then back on the back end, you need an axle. And I can feel it when I'm turning it. I will double check when I have other things apart to be sure it's not just the boot, but I would dare say with the amount of crap that's been getting into that joint, that axle is toast. And I'll get to the reasons for that in just a second. So we'll start up in the front. So just a basic, you'd mentioned going through a lot of brake pads on the bike. The reason for that is because you've been driving around with the brake stuck on. And it's been doing that, I would say, for quite some time. So the first indication of that for me was when I jacked the bike up, and with one hand I should be able to spin that hub, even with the wheel off. I can spin it with one hand with the wheel on, but I can't move it easily with one hand without having both hands to turn it. So that told me when I started at this wheel was that I had brakes sticking on. So I went around to every wheel, took all the wheels off. I normally do that for this service anyway. And I found similar issues, not quite as bad on the right front, really bad on the right rear, and same sort of issue going on that left rear hub. So that takes us, so we get a central problem that's causing the brakes to stick on. The pads being wore out is just a symptom. So I popped the cap off the master cylinder, and I see all this kind of little dirt around that top edge. And when you look at the inside of the cap, I can see that it's had mud inside of it, because all that is from after I took the rubber out. I never dropped anything inside of it. You can see it all up and around the threads, and you can see how it's been getting in underneath the seal on the top. So the purpose of this is just basically like a diaphragm. And what happens when you press your brake pedal down and you force brake fluid down your brake lines, the fluid in the reservoir, the level has to go down because the fluid's going out the lines. It doesn't go down, it doesn't move very much, but it still has to move somewhat. And if you had this sealed as a solid seal on the top, like a solid cap with no air able to get in, then you basically would be trying to create a vacuum. Your brakes wouldn't work. So the diaphragm makes it so it breathes. So the purpose of the diaphragm is to separate it from the fluid from the air above, and just to allow air to get pulled in on the cap. And that's kind of what this little, if you look down in here, there's little slots and stuff. It's a little hard to see in here, but there's little built-in indentations into that white cap, and that's where the air comes in and goes in on top of that rubber diaphragm, and that allows your brakes to breathe and to actually function. If it's not allowed to breathe properly, if those are all plugged up, or if there's water in on top, so you can see that's wet, it will make it so that the brakes will stick, because this diaphragm isn't able to easily let the air back out or let whatever back out after you let go of your brake pedal. So you're restricting the movement of the brake system, so you end up driving around with brakes stuck on. And in this case, it's sort of a cumulative thing. The worse the problem is there, the more pressure that you're applying, and the pressure never really goes away. Or the first time you use your brake, each time you drive your bike, when you let go of the pedal, you still have brakes on, and you don't really realize it. So that keeps expanding, sending the piston out a little bit further, the pistons out further in all the brake calipers. Your brake pads stick. In your case, some of them are worn, some of them are damaged, just because of the fact they've been riding on the brake disc so long. And the heat will actually cause, in your case, you have like this disc here is grooved quite badly, especially on the back side. You can feel it. Of all of the discs, probably the right front one is probably the one is in the best shape, but the other three all have to be replaced, so I wouldn't even bother just doing 3 out of the 4. You would do all of them at the same time. If you go to the back, and actually, just so you can have a look down in here, if you look down in your master cylinder, there's supposed to be fluid in there, and you can actually see where there's, it looks like mud or dirt and water and stuff that's been had been able to get down in top of that master cylinder, because of that should be really nice and clean inside, and it's kind of muddy, dirty, dusty looking inside, and that's not from when I took the cap off, because I was really careful with it. So we go to the back of the bike. It's gotten the worst of the damage. This brake disc here is worse again than the one in the left front. So that one needs replaced. The brake lines, or the brake pads need to be replaced there as well. Over on this side, it was actually able to stay seized on long enough that you've basically warped the brake disc. It kind of has if you took it off and laid it this way, it would be kind of like a saucer you would use for a cup of tea. And you can see that from the bluing on the brake disc. That's also resulted in the seals popping. The caliper's actually damaged here, so this caliper needs to be replaced. And a lot of that probably has to do with what happened to that boot. Everything's been overheating. You're probably lucky that this didn't actually do like what I mentioned the other fella had the problem with, where the CV joint grease actually caught on fire because it got hot enough. You get enough heat going here. So one other item with just on the outer part of the brakes, if we go up here, you can see this guard. That's damaged. That needs to be replaced. It's actually riding on the brake disc, and that's probably you get a little bit of the grooving going on the back side of that disc. It's actually thicker on the outside edges than it is in here, and on the outside edge, because I don't have a outside caliper that I can just go at certain points on the brake disc, I can tell you that I feel that it's wore thinner than the spec right about in this area. But the fact is that it's all grooved, so you're never going to get good braking with that. And I'd be very surprised if I took that off and found that it was perfectly flat, because I feel it's probably warped a bit too. Next, so as far as the master cylinder goes, I can sit down and look at a parts breakdown and see if there's anything I can do as far as being able to take that apart. I don't believe there is. That's kind of a replacement item. If we have dirt and water contamination down in that master cylinder, down under the main body of it, it's not worth it to just take it and throw it away and put a new one on. In the parts breakdown, I do know that this is available separately on the top. Part of it is, but not enough of it that you don't have to buy the whole thing. It's just kind of weird the way they have it set up. You can replace that plastic top, but not the guts on the down on the inside, so we'll have to replace the whole thing. As far as your brake lines go, I did notice here on this left front caliper, you can see that when you've been turning the wheel, that it's got a divot war in it. That brake line's been contacting the brake caliper eventually. If it's not adjusted here at this clamp somehow, you should have a bit more slack in it somewhere. So, because what's happening is when you turn the wheel, and see if I can hold my phone right, if we turn the wheel all the way this way, you can see what that brake disc has been, the caliper has been doing, hitting on that brake line. Eventually it's just going to punch a hole in it. So as far as the brake lines go, I won't know for sure until, well, that's just where I checked the coolant. Sorry, it's kind of freaked me out there. I saw all that liquid. Anyway, as far as the brake lines themselves go, what I would think I would do first is I would try to see if I could get some fluid to run out of the lines and see what actually is inside of them. If I find that I'm getting rust and stuff coming out, we may end up having to replace the lines. But I mean, we can always put a new master on, hook the lines up to it, and try to flush some good new fluid into it and see if we can get the lines so that we don't have to replace all those. Unfortunately, the same applies to your brake calipers. Any of them, when I take them apart, if I dump them out and I find there's a whole bunch of rusty water in them, then you're looking at having to take the calipers apart and see if there's any water contamination inside those. You get enough water inside of them, and then they can rust the pistons on the inside and make them stick. The other part about water in your brake system is it has a different boiling point than brake fluid does. So it can also act all by itself to make it so that your brakes stick on. So not just the other part that I was talking about where the brakes can stick on from dirt and contamination and stuff in the master cylinder, but the water itself will expand at a different rate, and that'll make your brake calipers stick out where they shouldn't be. So anyway, that's kind of a run through of your brakes. So I have to sit down and I'll have to do an estimate up of all the parts and stuff that it needs, and we'll kind of start with I'll hope that I can save like things like brake lines, that we're not going to have to replace the other 3 calipers and stuff like that. All right, caliper pads, just fire rod ends. Did load test your battery. It's low on charge. It's down to about 70%. The other part of it is that battery's rated at 340 cold cranking amps, and you're only getting about 276. Sometimes I can get that back when I put a nice long slow charge into them. So I will do that while the bike is here. Just charge it up and make sure we get the battery so it's healthy again. I would recommend that when you're not using it, keep a battery maintainer hooked up to it. Take it out and put it in inside somewhere. Put a battery maintainer on it. Whatever you have to do. Batteries are expensive. Last thing I'm going to go over. I was going to lower the bike down to do this, but hopefully you can easily see the condition the air filter is in. So if you see the locking tabs on the top of the air box, either 3 or 4 of those locking tabs weren't locked. So the air filter cover's actually been loose. I'll have a look at the seal on the cover and see what kind of shape that's in. Might be able to just clean the rubber seal. May end up having to replace it if it's in bad enough shape. But the air filter itself, I'm going to take that out and I'm going to throw it away. And we're going to put a new oiled filter in. We're not going to bother trying to salvage that guy. He's just too much of a mess, too much cleaning, too much of air filter solvent to go through and all that stuff. It's just not worth it. Anyway, and I'll also wipe out the air box. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Like I said, I'm going to send you this video, and early next week, probably by Tuesday, I'll have an estimate for you to do all the repairs, and then we can kind of go from there. Have a great weekend.